We go. How's it going, YouTube, Dueling Book, and all the Yu-Gi-Oh fans out there? It's Vengeful Shadows, and we're going to do a real quick video today about an amazing card. And I just want to give a quick shout out to my boy Mr. Kodak. If you do not follow Mr. Kodak on Twitch, on Twitter, or on any of the platforms like YouTube as well, you should definitely do yourselves a favor and drop him a follow. Be kind of keeping up with the current meta in Yu-Gi-Oh by watching him on Twitch. Real good buddy of mine, and he's always on the cutting edge of all the nice stuff coming to the meta. Okay, I was playing Punk before it was cool, trust me on that. And a card that is a tech from him with Mr. Kodak and was in his most previous deck profile is Gravity Collapse, okay? And that's a card we want to focus on here today. Gravity Collapse is actually a real nice meta kind of tech a couple years back, even about 1 year back, a little bit when Synchros kind of hit with the Sword Soul. And that's because it is a lot of card packed into a single card, okay? And what Gravity Collapse does is it is a counter trap, okay? And when your opponent would summon a monster or monsters, you send one face-up synchro monster you control to the graveyard to negate the summon. And if you do that, destroy that monster, and your opponent cannot summon a monster until the end of this turn. And that's insane, okay? So essentially, counter trap, get rid of one of your synchros to negate their summon and end their turn for summoning. And much of you know right now that if you cut your opponent off at summoning for the rest of the turn, they lose the duel. They can't do anything. Most decks just quit. Most people just surrender, pick up the stuff right there and take it away. And that's what we're trying to bring to everyone today, is Gravity Collapse is really nutty. Okay, and now a few people are asking, all right, well, that's cool, Gravity Collapse is nice, but how can we kind of like play it in our deck? And a lot of decks right now actually have access to Gravity Collapse and Synchros overall. Okay, and we're going to get over that. We're going to kind of go over that real quick today, because not saying you should just tech it and everything, but it is something that a lot of decks that don't think they could play it could definitely play it. Okay, that being said, some of those decks right now are, we got Punks, obviously being able to synchro a lot. Again, that's what Mr. Kodak was playing, and he would actually not main deck Gravity Collapse, but he actually sided it. So when he was guaranteed going first, he would side in 3 Gravity Collapse, be able to make into a synchro board, and then when the opponent would summon, negates the summon, ends their summoning mechanic for the rest of the turn. And in Punk, you're pretty much guaranteed to win on the following turn. You can already OTK, but if you go first, set up, and then get a third turn without your opponent having any monsters, you immediately win the duel. So the number one deck right now, I would say, for Gravity Collapse is Punk. They already have like the synchro establishment in the deck, and then they can also bring out multiple synchros in a turn, a field full of negates as well as a counter trap that cuts off all summoning. That's pretty insane. Another deck that was kind of cool that can once in a while go into it because it has multiple synchro outlets is Sword Soul. And I do want to give a shout out to probably the best way to Gravity Collapse right now, and that is P.U.N.K Febrax. And it's like, well, wait a minute, that's Link monster. Yes, you're right. But if you use his second ability, you can quick effect get rid of him to summon out an extra deck synchro tuner from your extra deck, okay? And not only that, but it counts as a synchro summon. So for those that are not familiar, you can bring out cards such as Formula Synchron or Desert Locust. Formula will allow you to draw. If it's your opponent's turn, you bring out the Desert Locust, your opponent's going to be discarding a card from their hand. That's really useful, but a lot of decks are really going to focus on the Formula Synchron draw, okay? And then at that point, you will actually have a synchro monster on the board to Gravity Collapse away. Okay, so even if you're not a deck that goes heavy into synchros, you can still summon tuner, non-tuner, link him into P.U.N.K. P.U.N.K will give you a tuner. You do whatever you need with that. But then on your opponent's turn, you can go P.U.N.K, formula draw, and then when they start summoning, you just gravity collapse them. Okay, that's going to end their turn, and you're pretty much going to be set up from there. All right, hopefully it's a deck you can start comboing off and go into kill. Most decks nowadays can, especially if you're going into a Hulk on your first turn. Okay, and then on top of that is Formula can also do a lot of cool things, and that is include like synchro with other monsters, so you can set up a monster that negates on board to get a nice negate, so you can kind of take away something like a lightning storm or an evenly, and then once they start setting up their board, that's when you hit them with the gravity collapse as well, so you can kind of like work around it. And then cool things like P.U.N.K, Jam, Dragon Drive, if they're on the board and you gravity collapse them, they can also revive themselves from their second ability, okay, when your opponent will chain to your P.U.N.K effect, and that's something really useful to keep in mind. So not only do you get a nice Jam Drive route after Formula or a draw, you can then get rid of the Jam Driver, negate them, cut them off their summoning, and then when they try to respond to your summonings on your following turn because you're about to kill them, you get a freed monster out of the graveyard, okay? So just, again, something to keep in mind. Again, I think it's just a lot for a little for gravity collapse, and that's why I feel moving forward into the sprite format and the tier element format, it's a lot better options than kind of like the solo hits we see. We see some strike, it like some players are playing strike. It's nice to be able to negate the monster summon and kill it, or just a monster effect. But as we're seeing going into sprites, or sprites, however you want to say it, whenever they summon, you kill it, they just keep summoning more monsters. So even with the hand traps right now, it's kind of the joke where if you have a deck full of hand traps, you're basically looping your own hand out to not stop the opponent, and then you don't even have a follow-up play because you dumped your entire hand. But if you get one solid gravity collapse out there, you're going to stop their entire play, and it's going to end the duel right there. You don't have to go through 3-4 hand traps to like potentially stop it, or try to negate the giant to Nibiru the board. You don't have to do any of that. You just get that gravity collapse off, and it's going to cut their entire turn out. And especially with tier elements, sometimes when you kill their stuff, they'll get monsters sent to the grave, things will fuse out of the grave. This will stop them right there, okay, when you kill the one monster. One thing I do want to say about gravity collapse though, kind of a point against it, but it's something to keep in mind. With gravity collapse, it does hit inherent summons. What an inherent summon is a monster that essentially summons itself, or something that like a synchro summon. So if you're going to ritual summon out or use a fusion spell to fusion summon out a monster, you're not going to be able to gravity collapse it, because that's something like a solid warning you would need to stop the card that's going to be summoning the monster. So for decks like tier elements and other like decks that will use spell cards or monster effects to summon more monsters, you're going to want to hit one of their initial monsters to end their summoning process. Okay, you're not going to rely on them summoning out a fusion, because that's going to be one of the harder ones to hit with gravity collapse. Okay, but that being said, it is a counter trap, so it gets around a lot of their negate cards. Like if they summon out a carrot on their first turn and then start trying to proceed, you can still gravity collapse around it, because their negates and their omni negates are not going to be that of a spell speed 3, and they cannot beat it. Okay, so that's really useful. And another kind of thing I would like to mention, a bunch of the decks that can make the synchros to put up the monsters to summon out for gravity collapse, things like P.U.N.K decks, things like the Sword Soul, and a lot of decks that aren't running those types of cards like Desires for Sword Soul or the Field Spell for the P.U.N.K, you are able to run cards like Prosperity, and cards such as Prosperity are bringing a bunch of consistency to a ton of decks right now. So even if you're not just going to hard draw into it on your first turn or start with the 5, cards like Prosperity and Jammer and then the Desires are all ways to later on in your turn draw into that gravity collapse and just really solidify that opening board you're trying to maintain. And again, gravity collapse really is a turn 1 card. It's hard to say, oh, just play it when you're going turn 2, because by that time they're probably already going to have the monsters on board. But I do recommend, just when you're siding and you're going to go first, that gravity collapse is just kind of everything you need, and that extra nail in the coffin, and sometimes the only nail that you need in that coffin to end the game. Now, a nice thing as well about gravity collapses, and because it is market watch as well, we do have a few cheap options right here. This is the rare, and they're about, $1.15 shipping, so that's $2.15, you know, $3.04 down here, so about $2 to $3 after the shipping is included, and that's for the rare. And if we go back a year, we've seen rares actually hit about $10, and I'm pretty sure, don't quote me on this, but I think it's actually gone above $10 in the past when it was only a rare out of Star Strike Blast, because the only other copy we have is the OTS Common, and those are actually relatively cheap. There was some that was actually 37 cents a couple days ago. That's actually insane. But yeah, they're like 50 cents, 70 cents here. You know, it obviously goes up, but we're looking at about 50 cents for like the really cheap ones for the common of Gravity Collapse. So if you don't have any, I do recommend picking some up, because this card is insane, and it, especially if synchros were to just become prevalent in the meta just all the time, like Gravity Collapse will be a card people are going to have or want to have a copy of for themselves to be able to play and not be stuck, you know, with the people upcharging for it. So guys, hopefully you enjoyed the video and could shed some light on a little bit of, you know, card tech to help you guys in the side deck game or just overall. And if you like anything we covered here, do consider hitting that subscribe button. We're trying to get the numbers up. We also have a Twitch and a Twitter as well. And again, my buddy Mr. Kodak, always follow his socials as well. And guys, stay safe out there and have a good one, okay?